What if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the most unthinkable way? What if your own father, blinded by a new love, willingly signed you away to a sinister special school because you dared to uncover his new girlfriend's terrifying secret? I was just a kid, but I was about to expose a monster, and it nearly broke me. I was only 13 when my world imploded. My mom, my amazing, gentle mom, was convicted of manslaughter 5 months earlier. She was at a bar and she wasn't even drinking. I was there with her. She just went to the back bathroom, then came out minutes later, her face pure panic, covered in blood. She screamed for someone to call the police. They showed up so fast, slapped her in handcuffs, and took her away. The next time I saw her, it was behind glass. None of it made sense. My mom didn't have a violent bone in her body. She swore she didn't do it. But my dad, the way he acted after her conviction, it made my stomach churn with suspicion. He brought Sloane home instantly. And on day 1, he told me, point blank, that she was my new mom. He said my real mom was a monster, a killer I needed to distance myself from for my own safety. At first, I didn't know what to believe. My dad was my dad. But then, 5 months later, he announced they were engaged. And not only that, I had to start calling Sloane Mommy. That was the moment. That was when I became absolutely convinced of my mom's innocence. It was also when Sloane really started to get comfortable. She began watching me eat. Not eating herself, just watching. Chin in her hand, those eyes following every bite, saying things like, "You are going to be such a useful young man." The hair on my arms would stand on end. The worst part? My dad thought it was sweet. He actually said she was just trying to bond. I finally worked up the courage to tell him, "Dad, Sloane makes my skin crawl." And he looked at me completely serious and called me dramatic. But he must have told her what I said because that night, while he slept soundly, Sloane slipped into my room. She grabbed my wrist. Hard. So hard it left marks. And she whispered, "You know what happens to little boys who tattle?" I was terrified. But I also knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that I couldn't trust my dad. I couldn't tell him. So I kept it a secret. And I started keeping another secret around the same time. I began writing letters to Mom. I'd hide them between textbook pages, then mail them from my friend Priya's house after school. Mom would write back through the prison email system to an account I'd created without my dad ever knowing. It was my lifeline. Then things got truly bad one specific Thursday. I came home from school and my dad proudly announced he'd changed my last name on all school records to Merrick. Without even asking me. "You'll thank me when you're older," he said. That night, Sloane came into my room. She sat on the end of my bed, supposedly celebrating us being a real family now. She put her hand flat on my ankle, threw the blanket, and just left it there. "I should be grateful," she purred, "to have a mom who pays attention." I yanked my leg away, scrambled into the bathroom, and locked myself in until she finally left. I felt violated. A week later, I found it. The notebook. It was in her purse on the counter, and I only looked because I was hunting for change for a vending machine. It was a cheap spiral notebook, but it was full of dates, all in her handwriting. Subject was defiant at dinner. Subject refused food. Subject was observed talking to himself. Subject appears to be having difficulty distinguishing reality. 40 pages of it, going back to day 1, all about me, all of it made up. When she caught me holding it, she didn't get angry, she just took it. Very gently, and said with a chilling smile, "Someone had to keep track of you since nobody else would." I remember writing to Mom about that. The letter I got back from her was on real paper this time, not an email, and parts of it were damp, almost transparent, like she had cried while writing it. That almost broke me, but there was one thing I looked forward to, the chance to see her. Her birthday was coming up. I enthusiastically asked my dad, "Please, Dad, just for a few minutes?" "I know you don't like her, but it's her birthday." Of course I got told no. Actually, I got told something even worse. Dad said we couldn't go. Because that exact weekend, Sloane had coincidentally booked us into a lake resort 2 hours away. She'd even specifically requested adjoining rooms. When I said I'd rather visit Mom, my dad exploded. "She's a killer. You're not visiting a murderer." When I retorted that she was innocent, that she was still my mom, Sloane suddenly backhanded me across the face. Hard. Dad just watched. He said nothing. I was forced to go with them that weekend. And while I was sleeping, the worst thing happened. I woke up on top of the covers, shoes still on, the room flooded with afternoon light. My phone said it was Sunday. I had lost an entire day. My elbow ached, and there was a small round bruise there, like a dot pressed in with a pen. In the bathroom trash can, I found a plastic hospital band, snipped clean in half. It had my first name on it, and then Merrick. When I came downstairs, Sloane was cheerfully making eggs. She asked how I was feeling. My voice was shaky as I asked her what happened. She just smiled. "You had a rough night," she said. "You got out of bed around 2 in the morning and started screaming at the wall. I had to take you somewhere to get you calmed down." She added that Dad had been very upset. I looked at Dad, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. I told them I didn't remember any of it. Sloane just said, "That's the concerning part." I remember the drive home feeling completely broken and confused, my thumb tracing that bruise the whole way. And to make matters even worse, the week we came home, my dad found the hidden letters from Mom. He burned them in the fire pit in the backyard, and as punishment for communicating with her, he took my bedroom door off its hinges for monitoring. Of course, Sloane took this as an opportunity. She would stand in the doorway at night watching me sleep, not moving. Just standing there, in the hallway light, with her arms at her sides. Some nights I'd wake up, and she would already be there. I never knew how long she'd been watching. That was a real breaking point for me. I remember sneaking off into the school library past hours the next day to email Mom. I must have sent an hour-long email that made no sense, just rambling about everything. I didn't know what I expected, if I even wanted anything, because I was so numb. But then, 2 weeks later, I got a reply from her. It was lengthy, super lengthy, telling me all the right things, how everything was going to be okay. But there was one thing that stuck out. "Did you check where I said?" I was confused. Check where? I started going through every single email she had ever sent me, and that's when I found it. In one of the more recent emails, Mom had told me to go up to the attic and look behind the radiator. I remember reading that email the day after asking my dad if I could visit her. I think I was too heartbroken to read thoroughly, and somehow I missed it. Either way, I made a big-time mental note. I waited until Dad and Sloane went on their usual date night the next week. My hands shook as I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. Behind the radiator, just like Mom said, I found a plastic-wrapped journal. I opened it to the marked page. It was dated weeks before Mom's arrest. In her own handwriting, it read, "It's been a few weeks since I caught Grant and Sloane sneaking off into the bar. I don't know how to confront him." I was shocked, completely taken aback. And that's when I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My blood ran cold. They were back early. The restaurant must have been too crowded, or maybe they'd had a fight. I could hear car doors slamming. Then Sloane's heels clicking on the walkway. My heart pounded against my ribs as I clutched the journal to my chest. Knowing I had only seconds to decide what to do, I heard Sloane's footsteps on the stairs, each creak of the old wood sending a jolt through my chest. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight, its beam dancing wildly across the dusty attic floorboards. I shoved the journal under my shirt, the cold plastic against my skin, and scrambled toward the attic opening. But I was too slow. Sloane's head appeared through the hole just as I reached the ladder, her eyes immediately locking onto mine. She stared for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Then she climbed the rest of the way up, careful and unhurried, like she had nowhere else to be. I backed up against the wall, feeling the rough wood press into my spine, the journal digging against my stomach under my shirt. She looked around the attic slowly, deliberately taking in the disturbed dust that hung in the air like tiny ghosts. The moved boxes near the radiator, where I'd found Mom's hidden things. She asked what I was doing up here, her voice calm but with an edge that made my skin crawl. I told her I was looking for my old comic boxes from when I was little, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her hands flexed at her sides. She stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on her breath from dinner, mixed with her expensive perfume that always made me feel sick. "You are a terrible liar," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "just like your mother." The words hit me like a physical slap. Then she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and pulled me toward the ladder. I had to use my other hand to keep the journal from falling out of my shirt, pressing it tight against my body. Dad was waiting at the bottom of the ladder, arms crossed, foot tapping impatiently. He looked annoyed, asking why I was sneaking around like some kind of thief in my own house. Sloane told him I was probably hiding something, her hand still gripping my arm. She suggested they search my room. I saw a flash of something dark, something truly sinister in her eyes. I panicked. I blurted out that I just wanted to find my old headphones because I couldn't sleep without my door. The words tumbled out too fast, too desperate. Dad rolled his eyes but seemed to buy it, probably because he was tired and didn't want to deal with more drama. That night, I waited until I heard them both asleep, Dad's deep rumble mixing with Sloane's softer breathing. The house settled into its nighttime creaks and groans. I carefully hid the journal inside my pillowcase, feeling the corners dig into my cheek when I lay down. I couldn't risk reading more with Sloane checking on me every hour, her shadow appearing in my doorway like clockwork. The next morning was Saturday. Dad made pancakes like nothing had happened, humming off key to some song on the radio. The normality of it made my stomach churn. Sloane kept watching me across the table, her eyes following every movement as I pushed food around my plate. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I took the journal with me. I hid it in the tank of the toilet, wrapped in a plastic bag I found under the sink. The water was cold on my arms as I carefully placed it inside. At school on Monday, I snuck into the computer lab during lunch, telling my friends I had to finish an assignment. The room was empty except for the hum of old computers and the tick of the wall clock. My heart was a drum in my chest. I started taking photos of each page of the journal with my phone, angling it to avoid the glare from the fluorescent lights. My hands were still shaking, making some photos blurry, but I kept going. The entries went back years. Mom's familiar handwriting became more frantic as time went on. She wrote about her suspicions, about seeing Sloane's car at weird hours parked down the street, about Dad acting strange and distant. One entry mentioned finding a motel receipt in Dad's jacket when she was looking for a pen. Another talked about Sloane showing up at the bar during Mom's shifts, always watching from a corner booth, always lurking like a predator studying its prey. I uploaded everything to a cloud account I made with a fake name, my heart pounding as the progress bar slowly filled. Then I deleted the photos from my phone, checking twice, 3 times, to make sure they were really gone. I knew Sloane might check it. She'd been going through my things more lately. When I got home that day, she was waiting in my room, sitting on my bed like she owned the place. She'd gone through everything. My drawers were dumped out, clothes scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. My mattress was flipped, the box spring exposed. Even my old card binder was emptied, commons and hollows spread across the carpet like confetti. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I played dumb, asking what she was talking about, trying to look confused instead of terrified. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard, my teeth clicking together. "I know you found something in the attic," she snarled. "I'm not stupid." Dad came home then, his keys jingling as he called out, "Hello?" He asked what was going on, surveying the destruction of my room with raised eyebrows. Sloane smoothly lied, her entire demeanor changing in an instant. She said she was helping me reorganize my messy room, that I'd asked for her help. She even flashed that fake smile that never reached her eyes. He believed her, like always, probably because it was easier than asking questions. That night at dinner, Sloane announced they were moving up the wedding. Instead of next year, it would be next month. She said she couldn't wait any longer to make our family official. Dad squeezed her hand and laughed like a kid. I felt sick, the chicken on my plate suddenly looking gray and unappetizing. Over the next few weeks, Sloane watched me constantly. She installed a camera in the hallway, pointing right where my door used to be, the red light blinking at me like an evil eye. She started driving me to and from school. No more bus with my friends. She'd wait in the parking lot, engine running, watching everyone who talked to me. She took my phone at night, placing it on her nightstand where I couldn't reach it, but I kept working during the day. I printed pages from the journal at school and hid them in my locker, taping them behind old textbooks. I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. My teachers seemed oblivious. My friends wouldn't understand. Then I remembered Aunt Becca. She was Mom's best friend since high school. The kind of person who just showed up to help without being asked. They'd been inseparable until Mom's arrest. Dad had banned her from contacting us after that, saying she was a bad influence, that she'd enabled Mom's violent tendencies. But I knew that was a lie. Aunt Becca was a good person who smelled like sawdust and always had butterscotch candies in her pocket. She ran a framing crew, had 3 kids of her own, twin boys and a daughter who called me her big cousin. I found her number in an old address book Dad had forgotten about in the kitchen junk drawer, buried under expired coupons and dead batteries. I called her from the payphone outside school during PE class, the metal cold against my ear. I told the teacher I felt sick and needed air, holding my stomach for effect. Aunt Becca answered on the 3rd ring, her voice softening when I said who I was. I talked fast, words tumbling over each other, telling her I needed help, that Mom was innocent, that I had proof. She told me to slow down, to breathe. Then she said to meet her at the public library after school the next day. She'd tell my dad she saw me walking and offered a ride if he asked. Her voice was steady, reassuring. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. Sloan was suspicious when I said I was staying late for a group project. She grilled me about who was in my group, what the project was about, which teacher assigned it, but my history teacher backed me up when she called to check, probably annoyed at being bothered during her planning period. I practically ran to the library, my backpack bouncing against my spine. Aunt Becca was waiting in the parking lot in her old pickup truck. The red paint was faded, but clean. She looked older than I remembered, with more gray at her temples and deeper lines around her eyes. But her eyes were still sharp. I showed her photos of the journal entries on my phone, swiping through them quickly. Her face got darker with each one, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. She said she always knew something was off about Mom's arrest. The story never made sense. Too many holes, too convenient. She asked if I still had the actual journal. I told her where I hid it, and she nodded approvingly. She said, "We need more than just Mom's suspicions. We need real evidence, witnesses, something concrete." She knew some people who worked at the bar that night. Maybe they saw something, remembered something the police didn't bother to ask about. Over the next 2 weeks, I met Aunt Becca at the library 3 more times. Each meeting felt like a spy movie checking over my shoulder, taking different routes. She tracked down Colton, who was working security that night. Colton was a big guy with kind eyes who remembered everything. He remembered Sloan being there, which was weird because Sloan had told police she was home all evening watching TV. He said the bar only had 2 single restrooms off the back hallway, so nobody ever thought twice about who went where. And he saw Sloan go into the back one right before Mom, maybe 30 seconds. But Colton had been too scared to speak up after Mom got arrested so fast, afraid of getting involved. Afraid of Sloan, who, he said, had connections everywhere. Aunt Becca also found Ronnie, who was bartending that night. He had a sharp memory for faces and a habit of counting people out of reflex. He said Sloan had been coming around for weeks before the incident, always asking about Mom's schedule, pretending to be friendly. He thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it at the time. People asked about regulars all the time. He remembered Sloan ordering a whiskey neat that night, then disappearing for a while before the body was found. He'd been the one to call 911, his hand shaking so bad he could barely dial. The breakthrough came when Aunt Becca talked to Callum, who managed the bar. Callum was an older guy who'd run the place for 20 years. Callum mentioned they'd upgraded their security system a month before the incident. The police had only taken the main camera footage, but there was a backup system that recorded the back hallway to the restrooms. Callum still had those files on an old hard drive in his office. He'd forgotten about them until Becca asked. The drive was gathering dust behind old liquor invoices. We met at Callum's house to watch the footage. His living room smelled like cigarettes and coffee. My stomach was in knots as Callum connected the drive to his laptop. The timestamp showed Sloan entering the back restroom at 9:47 p.m. Mendu, walking casually like she had all the time in the world. Sloan came out at 9:51 p.m., checking her watch and smoothing down her sleeve. Mom entered at 9:52 p.m., probably just needing to wash up before the end of her shift. Mom came out at 9:56 p.m., covered in blood, shouting for help, her face a mask of shock and horror. It was clear as day. Sloan had 4 minutes alone in that room, with a man who was still breathing when she walked in. More than enough time to kill someone and set up a frame job. Aunt Becca copied the footage onto multiple USB drives, her hands steady and methodical. She said we needed to be careful about how we handled this. We couldn't just go to the police. Sloan might have connections there, she warned. Friends who owe her favors. We need to build an airtight case first. She told me to act normal at home, not to let on that we knew anything. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But Sloan must have sensed something. Maybe I was a bad actor. Maybe she was just paranoid. She started getting more aggressive. One night, she came into my room and sat on my bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. The hallway camera couldn't see her from that angle. She said she knew I'd been sneaking around with Aunt Becca. Someone had seen us at the library, probably one of her friends who seemed to be everywhere. She said if I didn't stop whatever I was doing, Dad might get hurt. Accidents happen all the time, she said, her voice casual, like she was discussing the weather. People fall downstairs. Cars have brake problems. Gas leaks happen. I understood the threat, felt it settle in my chest like a cold stone. I was terrified, but I tried to stay calm, keeping my breathing even. I told Aunt Becca at our next meeting, whispering even though we were alone. She said we needed to move faster. She'd been in touch with Mom's lawyer, showing him what we'd found. The lawyer was excited, but cautious. He said we needed the original journal too. It would strengthen the case, prove the photos weren't doctored. I told him I'd get it, even though the thought made me want to throw up. That night, I waited until 30 on the IM, watching the clock's red numbers change with agonizing slowness. I crept to the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I carefully retrieved the journal from the toilet tank, the plastic still protecting it. It was still dry in its wrapping. Mom's words, safe. I put it in my backpack for school, zipping it into the inner pocket. But when I came out of the bathroom, Sloan was standing in the hallway like a ghost. "What are you doing up?" she asked, her eyes glinting in the darkness. I said I felt sick holding my stomach. She stared at me for a long moment, then let me pass. I felt her eyes on my back all the way to my room. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, empty, its contents spread across the table. Sloan was sitting at the table with the journal in front of her, flipping through pages with theatrical interest. Dad was reading it, his face pale and confused. Sloan had told him I'd been writing stories about her, that I was disturbed, that I needed help. She'd started pointing out specific entries, saying, "Look how he's trying to copy your wife's handwriting. See how he mentions you and me together? This is clearly his sick fantasy about breaking us up." Dad's confusion turned to anger as Sloan kept talking, weaving her lies with just enough truth to make them believable. And then she did the thing I never saw coming. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, sliding it across the table to him. It was a discharge summary from an urgent care 2 towns over, dated that Sunday at the lake. Acute episode. Paranoid ideation. Patient reported persecutory beliefs regarding a family member. Recommend immediate psychiatric follow-up. My name at the top with Merrick after it, and Dad's signature at the bottom on the consent line, because she had him sign it while I was unconscious in the backseat, telling him it was a form for the front desk. Dad read it twice. I watched every bit of doubt drain from his face. He believed her. He said he was disappointed in me, that making up lies about Sloan was sick, that he thought I was dealing with Mom's absence better than this. I tried to tell him it was Mom's journal, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was obviously forging Mom's handwriting to frame Sloan because I couldn't accept her as my new mother. He said the paper proved it. He said the doctors had already seen it, that this had a name, that it was a real thing and not my fault, but that I needed help. He said I needed a special school for troubled kids. Sloan suggested her cousin ran one in another state. Very strict. Very isolated. Good for fixing problem children who told lies and caused trouble. The way she said it made my blood run cold. I felt the walls closing in, the room spinning slightly. That day at school, I found Aunt Becca's truck in the parking lot at lunch. I climbed in and broke down crying as I told her what happened. She said not to worry. We still had the footage. But when I got home that afternoon, my phone was missing from my backpack. Sloan had it. She went through everything and found my cloud account, guessing the password after 3 tries. She made me watch as she deleted all the journal photos, her fingers stabbing at the screen with vicious satisfaction. She said Aunt Becca's copies wouldn't matter without the original to verify them against. She said the photos could be faked, that any decent lawyer would argue they were doctored without the original journal to compare the handwriting. And now, she sneered, there's a doctor's note that says you see things that aren't there. So, who exactly do you think a jury is going to believe? The bar footage was different. That was from an official security system with timestamps that could be verified. But handwriting and photos? Too easy to forge. That night, Dad told me I was leaving for the school on Monday. This special place would help me deal with my delusions about Sloan. He'd already called them. They were expecting me. It was 1,000 miles away, in the mountains. No phones allowed. No outside contact for the first 6 months to avoid negative influences. I realized this was Sloan's plan to shut me up for good, to make me disappear without actually having to make me disappear. I managed to slip out Saturday morning when Dad went grocery shopping and Sloan was in the shower. I could hear the water running as I eased open the front door. I ran to Priya's house and used her phone to call Aunt Becca. Priya's mom was at work, and Priya covered for me. Bless her. I told Aunt Becca about the school. She said to pack a bag and meet her at the library in an hour. But when I got back home, Sloan was waiting on the front steps, her hair still wet. She'd noticed I was gone. She dragged me inside by the back of my neck, her nails digging in. Dad wasn't back yet. She threw me against the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame down and said I'd ruined everything. She said she'd worked too hard to let a kid destroy her plans. Mom deserved to rot in prison, she spat. She'd been planning this for months before that night at the bar. She said Dad was easy to manipulate, so desperate for attention after Mom started working 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. I asked her why she killed that man in the bathroom. I needed to hear her say it. Sloan laughed an ugly, chilling sound. She said the guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sloan had gone in there to plant a bloody knife she'd prepared, one that would have Mom's prints on it from the kitchen at home. But the drunk saw her setting it by the sink and started asking questions, getting too close. So Sloan had to silence him quick and messy, using that same knife. Then, when Mom came in minutes later to help, it was perfect. The blood was fresh. Mom's prints got on everything when she tried to help the victim, tried to stop the bleeding. And in the chaos, Sloan pocketed the actual murder weapon and left a different knife at the scene, one she'd also prepared, but that wouldn't trace back to her. I asked her about the lake. I asked her what she gave me. She grinned. It took 20 minutes to work. And you talked the whole drive about a dog we'd never owned. Kids your age get diagnosed all the time and nobody ever asks a second question. All I needed was one signature on one piece of paper. And after that, nothing you said for the rest of your life would ever count for anything. I was recording everything. Priya's phone, hidden in my pocket, the record button pressed before I even walked in. Sloan didn't notice. She was too busy ranting about how smart she'd been, how she'd worn gloves, how she'd studied the bar's schedule for weeks. She said after Mom was gone, marrying Dad was just smart business. He had good life insurance from his job at the plant, and I'd be worth even more in survivor benefits if something happened to him. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fall, maybe he'd just get sad and take too many pills. She said, "You think you're the first?" My blood ran cold. There was a family in Marion before yours. There was one before that. That's when Dad walked in. He'd come back early because he forgot his wallet. He heard everything Sloan had just said. His face went white as paper. He dropped the grocery bags, oranges rolling across the floor. Sloan spun around, realizing her mistake. She tried to backtrack, saying I'd made her angry, that she didn't mean it, that she was just trying to scare me straight. But Dad had heard enough. The veil had finally lifted. Sloan stepped toward him and he backed away, his hand reaching behind him. He told her to get out. She said he was overreacting. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the block and told her to leave, or he'd call the police. Sloan laughed. "You wouldn't dare," she taunted. "Too much scandal, too much shame. What would the neighbors think?" But Dad's hand was steady as he held the knife. For the first time in months, I saw the Dad I used to know. The one who taught me to ride a bike in the church parking lot and let me steer the truck down the driveway. Sloane realized he was serious. Her face changed, the mask finally dropping completely. She grabbed her keys and her purse from the counter, but before leaving, she turned to Dad and said, "This isn't over. I know too much about you. About the money you'd taken out of Mom's savings before any of this started. If you go to the police, I'll destroy you." Then she left, slamming the door so hard the windows shook and the rest of the pictures fell off the walls. Dad sat down on the kitchen floor in the middle of the oranges. He didn't cry. He just sat there, his back against the cabinet, his hands open on his knees like he was waiting for somebody to put something in them. I took Priya's phone out of my pocket and set it on the floor in front of him. I pressed play. Sloane's voice filled the kitchen. I watched him listen to all 9 minutes of it. When it got to the part about the knife, he put his hand over his mouth. When it got to the part about the lake, he looked at the inside of my elbow. When it got to the part about the insurance, he made a sound I have never heard a person make before or since. When it finished, he asked me to play it again. I played it again. Then I picked the phone up off the floor and called the police. And I gave them my mother's name first, before I gave them Sloane's, because after 14 long, horrifying months, that was the only part I actually cared about. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right, even when it meant facing down a monster? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to know.